Check back for my next video. I'll be talking about the VIX. Again, the VIX could be suggesting we are close to a bottom. It's up 59%. The highs are topping till. Oftentimes the VIX will bottom before the S&P. The VIX will top before the S&P bottoms. Make another shorter video on Sunday. Talk more about the VIX. Try to keep the video shorter and show you some of the signals I'm looking at. Correctly called the top. Warned you when the S&P peaked that we had broke above the 50-period moving average here. I'll talk more about that. Diversions that marked they diverged from one another, marked this surge in volatility, and we could see a bottoming process. The previous week, we might try to form a bottom this week. Shortly thereafter, if we reach key support levels, which we're doing. More about the VIX and other signals, check back. Post sometime on Sunday, either Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon. I'm making an extra video because I talked about recession signal that was triggered with the jobs report there on Friday. Watch that video, go watch it. It's a shorter video. Important information that you need to know about. And the stock market is topping. About the VIX, it is predicting a bounce or a bottom. Check back. Don't miss that information. I just want to say, just like I warned you about this top right here, about the gap fill before it happened. I told you I thought that's where we were headed. We get a reversal there. We rose by 15 minutes and then sold off the rest of the session. And I told you, I think we're in a bottoming process. You're going to see back and forth moves. I thought we would reverse there, and we did. Just like I told you back up here at the top. We slammed right in this trend line. We had the diversions. NASDAQ already peaked on the 10th. S&P a few days later on the 16th peaked, and it diverged with the NASDAQ, and I told you that at the time with this negative diversions. So again, thought, hey, we had a top on the 10th. I told you that on the 11th and on the 12th. Week ended. I thought we'd get a big sell-off the following week. I told you about this divergence right here. NASDAQ, I told you, would recover back up to fill the Fibonacci retracement, 78.6 Fibonacci. I told you S&P could move to a new high and diverge as it often does. NASDAQ, it did just that, slammed into this trend line, rising wedge, and we got the diversions, and this happened. I told you the day that momentum signals flipped. Still think S&P is probably going to go make a new high. Once we bottom out here, I think we're likely in a bottoming process, as I've been saying. If I'm wrong about that, my signals will remain bearish, and we don't bottom out. We just start busting through and going lower to 49.50, the neckline of the head and shoulders, or the head and shoulders pattern. Early time frame on S&P and the head and shoulders at 17,000, the neckline at 17,000 for NASDAQ. Some absolutely amazing calls. And again, talked about the little diversions here. Told you here I expected to at least go back and fill the gap, and then we'll see, does NASDAQ and S&P diverge from one another, because I still expected NASDAQ to go lower. We hit this trend line, and I told you still may go to those other levels of support on the NASDAQ. Still risk of S&P going down. Sometimes they diverge. Saw back up at the top. I think a larger divergence will develop, but absolutely amazing, and predicted that reversal right on the nose, like here with the help of the NASDAQ hitting the 78.6 Fibonacci. Diversions now, it may not be done. I'll be looking for clues. But absolutely amazing calls. Support the channel with the link directly below that allows me to be able to provide you this information. You like the signals? Do you like the charts? Let me know that by supporting the channel. Take a moment to do that. I would really appreciate it. Need your help in order to justify doing this. If you could take a moment to do that, I would really, really appreciate it. Here are the charts I look at every single day. Just let me know you want this information, that you like this information. Absolutely amazing calls. Consider supporting the channel today. It'd be very encouraging to hear from you. Doing another video on Sunday featuring the S&P 500 and some other signals, a lot of my other signals video, but I wanted to take the time to focus some of these levels on the NASDAQ. So check back on Sunday. I'll likely post it in the morning or afternoon. A few things I'm not going to be showing you in this video about the S&P. Some of the NASDAQ signals I'm showing you in this video, the signals that call the top, looking for a bottom. Quickly, the signals on the NASDAQ. Take a look. Again, we're becoming oversold now with momentum. Okay, again, might go a little bit lower. You might turn back up and start moving to gap resistance or to fill the gap, and then turn back down and end up forming a divergence. Similar to what we did right here before this bounce. We may just start recycling back up and right to bottom, but we're going to be looking for clues. You got a shot at a bottom here. By the way, same thing is true for the NASDAQ. We're at extremes. Again, we're nearly at the target of the head and shoulders, which is why I thought we were going to go lower. We may get a bounce in form of diversions or go a little bit lower and get a bounce in form of diversions, but I'm looking for a bottom, possible inverse head and shoulders setting up. And again, we might go closer to 200 period. We got a candle of indecision. It's either a continuation pattern or a reversal bar in the daily time frame, but more about that later on the NASDAQ. But again, we're at extremes. So again, we'll be looking to see if we try to recycle back up at some point beginning of the week, Monday or Tuesday. MACD still may come back. We may try to see it recycle back up, go lower and rebound, or just rebound and still come back and make a lower low. We'll be watching. I think you got a shot that a bottom is developing. We start breaking these key levels of support, then forget it. To go lower. Warned you when we went up to the gap fill area. Again, we were forming these divergences. Would get one more push higher. It did. We went up for about 15 minutes or so. You see that here on the 5-minute chart, and then this followed and played out just as I thought it would. Now we're going sideways, so we'll see if we attempt some kind of recovery or go down further and then get some kind of recovery. We'll be watching. Signals remain bearish. Guess is a bottom's probably forming. NASDAQ's just below the 100 period. S&P's testing it. You got this horizontal support right here directly below. So again, you broke the trend line. Again, Bitcoin broke the trend line, but it got back above it. I think right now it's diverging with the S&P 500. So again, if we lose the 100, if we lose this horizontal support holding below this level, then you're at risk of a bigger drop down here to 49.50, back here to the 200 period moving average. So again, and getting your right shoulder, the right part of the head formation completing. So again, it could happen that way. If we just blow through this level, it could happen. Did you hear what I just said? No guarantee that we bounce and go back and fill the gaps. Do I think that's probably going to be the case? Yes. But we still may move lower until my signals turn back to bullish. Possible head and shoulders. It may be that we go up here and go to a higher high and then come back down if we diverge with NASDAQ again or try to fill these gaps. Key support here, 52.64 and reversed off 55.56 right at that 20 period moving average, right on the nose. CD rolled over, still bearish. It's coming right now to the center line here, just below it. If we try to firm up, you got a shot at rebound. If it remains negative, you're going to get a bigger drop. How about support and resistance? But we broke the trend line here. You'd have to be able to get back above it to go back and fill those gaps. We're trying to find a bottom here or just a little bit lower. We'll be watching these levels, especially 52.64, horizontal support right here. Our 100 period moving average. I'll stop the 100 period moving average over here. Would attempt to do it right here. We're just beyond it. Bitcoin dropped below the trend line, but then got back above it. And again, I have it including the shadow and excluding the shadow. We got back above both of them. Went back up to this trend line of resistance, B, and we're moving back down. Right now, my signals turned bearish at the top up here, and the momentum turned bearish. We tested the 100, tried to bounce, it failed. Now we're testing the 200 at B, and this trend line again, by the way, that we see Bitcoin and the S&P and NASDAQ all go back to a positive correlation. They currently have a negative correlation. B, it goes back to positive if Bitcoin tries to bottom at the 200 and we rebound and we come back up here and maybe get a lower high and again a massive divergence between the S&P and Bitcoin. Just food for thought. What happens at tops is Bitcoin diverges with the S&P 500. Already diverging. Hasn't been able to make new highs. S&P has. They may get one more reference point. They may go back to a positive correlation. We'll see. Negative correlation continues and we get some kind of bottom maybe in the market. It rebounds like Bitcoin did when I called a bottom back over here, and Bitcoin starts dropping and the S&P continues to be following Bitcoin's lead. We'll see how it unfolds. I'd be surprised to see the correlation turn back to positive at some point. Maybe that does it here. Only possible. If you want to hear more about Bitcoin, you can see my latest Bitcoin videos. I'll link it at the end of this video. I'll be making another Bitcoin video on Saturday. Let me just show you these long-term trend lines on NASDAQ. Again, I talked about the breach of this trend line. We have this horizontal support, the 100 period now in play in the lower boundary of the cloud. Let's just zoom out and take a look at these trend lines. Again, there's still risk of coming all the way back down to the 200 and to the 49.50 area, horizontal support down here. If we don't get a bounce, got at it, but no guarantee. Signal's got to turn back to bullish if it's going to happen. Now back to Bitcoin. Bitcoin, real fast, it broke the trend line from the October 2023 low. You got another trend line again down from September that's much lower, but it broke the trend line and price got back above it. S&P do the same. When Bitcoin was bottoming July 5th, that the market was topping, NASDAQ peaked on the 10th, give you all those warning signals. Here, S&P's broke the trend line from October 23. Okay, does it do what Bitcoin does and get back above it? Again, we had a trend line right here, and you broke the trend line from the 2022 low. You ended up getting back above it. Do we see the same thing? Maybe. Trend lines change all the time. If you reverse hard off of them, come down and break them, and go much lower. And that's why, again, we're watching this level, 200 period moving average, and down here, this trend line as well. And again, could S&P follow Bitcoin back up? Could they move back to a positive correlation? At some point, they will. But right here, we're coming down towards the 50% retracement. We moved just beyond it. Just below that is the 61.8 Fibonacci, the 5217 area. My fib moved on me, but in that range right there, a little bit higher. Sometimes these trend lines and Fibonacci's, they move on you. But again, you can see what I'm looking at. We broke the trend line. Are we going to get the bigger drop down to here? We're going to do what Bitcoin did and try to get back above it, maybe try to bounce around the 100 period moving average. And again, you get this horizontal support level that we're coming into right now, right there. So again, we'll be watching that. S&P had that nice divergence that I talked about at the time at the top, and again, it diverged with NASDAQ with that divergence. We talked about all these signals back up at the top, but there was so much complacency. People think any kind of sell-off or reversal is possible as we are slamming into key resistance. The risk is the MACD remains in negative territory now that we've dropped below that level, and we end up coming down to this 49.50 area. And you know that we only get some kind of bounce or go lower, get some kind of bounce, and just continue on down. Again, got a shot at a bottom here if these support levels can hold. And again, on NASDAQ and right here on S&P 500, you got some horizontal support. You've got the cloud here, 100-day moving average not seen here. So again, shot at it, but no guarantee. See the signals turn back to bullish. Warned you when we rebounded back up for NASDAQ to get the lower high, S&P moved to a higher high. It's diverged at that point with NASDAQ. Now we're coming back down. We've seen 3 weeks of selling. We were told this was not going to happen. P down 2%, another 2% for the week. Again, you could try to find a bottom. Remember when we hit the 20-week moving average over here, I told you, hey, we very well may have a bottom that goes up and makes a lower high or a higher high. Came right up to this trend line right here. Overthrew it ever so slightly, formed a rising wedge, and now we're breaking down. You still got a shot. We rebound if we get back above the broken trend line, October 2023 low. But again, I warned you about these divergences on the MACD and the RSI. If we do that, you might do what you did over here and come back and form a divergence. NASDAQ getting a lower high, S&P getting a higher high, and coming down here and having this topping process taking multiple weeks to form. And again, I have no patience for this kind of stuff. So again, if we do go higher, it's going to suck in the bulls. Designed. The market is designed to do as much damage to both bulls and bears alike, but it's going to be, if we do get a rally back up, it's going to be designed to suck in the bulls, to create fear and doubt in the bears. We may just keep going down if we break the 20 and we come down here, but you got a good shot. We might bottom out. NASDAQ overthrew it last time. It's done it now, and S&P tagged it like it's doing right now. Here, it's just touched it. Just above, or actually at the lows, we were touching it. But again, MACD's rolled over. I warned you about all this. But again, people, so emotional. Again, it could be that we try to go back up and make a new high. Over here, we have the diversions, but then we try to turn back up. Another reference point. Could see something like that. NASDAQ, S&P is going to probably move to a new high. But my signals remain bearish. If we flip at the 20 period, I'll start saying, hey, my signals are bullish. We're going back to fill the gaps. Yeah, S&P is probably going to move to a new high. Same thing I told you back over here. Back to the trend line. Trend line I talked about over here. I told you again. Back to the trend line. Going to overthrow it. We ended up overthrowing it. Now I talked about this trend line. Back to the trend line. A rising wedge. Said it over and over again. It played out. We just went a little bit higher. Told you we could overthrow the trend line. Talked about this trend line. Talked about the negative divergences. People get so complacent that when it plays out, they're shocked and in disbelief. Patience is a virtue in trading. Tuning out emotions, tuning out of it. And if we do bottom out and try to bounce off the 20, you're going to hear same nonsense. Oh, here we go, bull market. We're not going to have a recession. You're going to hear all that same nonsense. I think S&P is probably going to move to a new high if we can bounce. NASDAQ's filling the gap at 20,400, probably overthrowing it. You're probably going to get a top, and these people will be in for another rude awakening. Don't be surprised if the signals try to turn back to bullish. Bearish, we'll see what happens. But the signals were correct. The emotions were wrong. Like I told you over here, my signals are bullish. We're going back to the trend lines, the trend line here, and then to overthrow it. We watched this trend line, and you can hear me say the same thing if my signals turn back to bullish. Signals are bullish. We're going back to fill the gaps. Probably see something like what we had over here, where you have a topping process over several weeks, hanging out around this area, as I've talked about over and over again. Most people comment on a move after it has already been made. Most people don't have the guts to tell you exactly what they think, predict things before they happen. When the stock market's going higher, they'll post things about how obvious it was that a long position was a no-brainer. Have that happen, by the way, bottom around the trend line that I'm going to be talking to you about that we're hitting right now. Just beyond it. Or if we get a sell-off like what we just had over the last 3.5 weeks, then people will be posting how predictable it was after it already happened. We saw that when we got that worst day last week. Another worst day, by the way, there on Friday. I think the worst day since 2020. We had the worst day since 22 before that. So we're getting these worst days told. These are the same people that told us it wasn't going to happen. But most people don't have the courage and the guts to tell you what you think. They think. I told you over here when we were going sideways for 7 weeks, I told you we were going to get a sell-off. We'll be in an overall topping process. Or a bear market happens, we get the topping process. I keep saying this over and over. We hit the 20-week. I told you that very day may be a bottom for the NASDAQ that goes up and the S&P gets a lower high or a divergence, one or the other. If we get the higher high scenario, to be watching this trend line right here. Move up to it or overthrow it. What did we do? We moved up to it, and what happened? We overthrew it. And then, as we overthrew it, we hit other trend lines on the linear scaling. This is the log scaling. I use both. These divergences off, they're not going to, no. The market, no way the market's going down. AI. Now 3 weeks later, we're down. 3.5 weeks later, 11% or so, something like that. Try to get you the exact number. Move back to the 20-week moving average. Sold off. Again, jobs report did exactly what I said it was going to do. Triggered the recession signal. Rattled the markets. Well, that wasn't going to happen. Again, I'm telling you right now, we're at a point of support. I don't know the future, okay? Some fortune teller. I look at probabilities, I look at support and resistance, I look at mathematically based indicators. That's how I knew this was going to happen. As I said over here, you don't like me saying it, we're in a topping process. I think the NASDAQ has peaked. I don't think it's going to move to a new high. I still think it's in a topping process that will end up getting a lower high at some point. Whether we go down here and get it with the right shoulder, or whether we get it right now and get a lower high and then go down, remains to be seen. It really depends on the support level. Kept telling you over here, my signals remain bullish. We're going up to the trend line or overthrowing it. People sometimes looking for a top, they don't want to hear that. I waited patiently, and I talked about when my signals hit right at the top. Those signals were amazing signals. We got the 9 counts on the weekly charts. We got the 9 count on the daily chart. It marked the very day of the top for the NASDAQ on the 10th. The sell signals with my indicators that I showed you as that top right before it and right with it as it was happening. I'm playing those signals, and it played out beautifully. I'm telling you, listen carefully. Markets go up and markets go down in a topping process. Maybe that's with the head and shoulders right here now. Maybe we bounce off this level and then we come down out a couple different ways. I'm telling you, at some point we're going to attempt a recovery. Maybe we have to go lower before that happens, but at some point we're going to get it. You got a shot at it right here. I think you're going to try to carve out a short-term bottom. The NASDAQ has the 200 period just below this level. We might reach that level, or we might try to bounce off this trend line. The way it plays out, at some point we're going to get a bounce. At some point we'll probably go back and try to recover and fill the gaps. We have several gaps now on the NASDAQ that have not been filled. And when we bottom out, if we do, around this trend line or maybe at the 200 just below, people that told us that never saw this coming, that told us it would not happen, they're going to tell us it's over, and we're all gonna the bull market because the Fed's going to cut. There's not going to be a recession, and all the same nonsense that we continue to hear. People drinking the Kool-Aid from the experts that are out this propaganda on the financial channels. If it's not, I mean, if it's not going to happen, why in the world are we seeing the distribution sell into the rallies? Why? I'm just telling you, everything's playing out. Now, again, we can get something like this where we get a rebound back up, and we get something like what we had on the MACD over here, where we try to turn back up, and again, you try to rebound. Here we're just below the 200 or 20 week. Here we were just below it. Here we bounced off of it. Here we were just below it. You can attempt to rebound surrounding this level, or maybe breach the trend line a little bit and try to bounce. I'm telling you, you got a shot at a bottom here. No guarantee we fill the gaps, but it's likely that we're going to. So just as you heard me say over here, hey, we're going towards this trend line, and we ended up at doing what? Overthrowing it. I was correct. You didn't want to hear that my signals remain bullish and we're going towards this trend line, but I kept saying it over and over, and it was right. And I waited patiently for that signal, and that signal paid off. I think you're going to see profit taking. Saw that earlier this week with the short squeeze. Alpha rally back up, and people just reset their shorts. But you were going to go down once we filled that gap at the with the S&P 500 at 55.56. The NASDAQ was just going to go to gap resistance and turn right back down. It's exactly what happened. Got it right. Again, I'm telling you, if we do form, did you hear the word if? There's no guarantee we go back up there. If this level breaks, we're going down to 17,000. Okay, if we just start breaking this level, you might breach it, but then get back above it. It bottoms, it's time to close short positions and go back to long. Markets go up and markets go down. If we do bottom, I'm just warning you right now, I'm going to be saying we're moving back to the gaps. My signals remain bullish. If my signals do turn back to bullish, which I think that there's a good chance that they will, if we can bottom surrounding this July 23rd low. Now, I told you, over through this trend line, there are some other trend lines that we could hit with the linear scaling. I look at both. 3.5 weeks ago, that we were moving into this trend line right here and this trend line right here, which is a parallel boundary to the lower boundary from the 2022 low and the 2020 low, which was the low of the pandemic. And you got this nice channel, and we turned down off of it. Now we're hitting the lower boundary of this channel. We may try to bounce. Again, slightly overthrowing it here with the move below the 20-week moving average. This is we're going to try to carve out a bottom. If we don't, again, coming down to this trend line right here may be where we're headed, which is the low from 2022 and the horizontal support, which could form the completion of the head formation, and then we bounce. So again, my guess is we're probably going to try to go back and fill these gaps, and I think we get something like this, where we get a lower high, go up to 20,400, come back down, and then come back to this level, break this trend line, and then come back to this support and this support. So that's what I think is probably going to happen. Will that happen? I don't know the future. If we break this level of support, my signals remain bearish because I have good indicators. We're going to go down to 17,000. NASDAQ can go a whole lot lower. I'm telling you, we got a shot, just like I told you back at the top. Pretty good chance that's the top. And I told you with that topping tail, the very next week we would likely see a big, ugly, nasty, red, ugly bar give us an evening star. And what happened? That exact bar formed. Very few people have the guts to tell you exactly what they think and make predictions. And I'm predicting, again, you got a pretty good shot. No guarantee. Great Scott, did you hear what I just said? He said no guarantee. Again, you don't know the future, and I don't know the future. I'm looking at support. You know, we're coming down to this level. We're just beyond this low right here. We're at this low right here. I'll show it to you on the daily chart. Right below that, you've got the 200 period moving average and some more support levels. You got a shot at a bottom, but no guarantee. 3.5 weeks ago, I made the prediction we were going to turn down. Told you that I thought on July 11th, when we had the 5% sell-off on the good, cool CPI data, closed below the Bollinger Band, we got the 9 count the day before, all the signals I talked about, the warning signs, and hitting these trend lines, I told you, hey, I think the market on the NASDAQ has topped, and I think the peak is in. We get a rebound back up, get a lower high at the 78.6 Fibonacci. All that was correct. I told you even this week, we're going to rally back up to gap resistance. Turn back and resume the sell-off. In all likelihood, I believed that we were still going lower about those levels. At a level of support that maybe we try to find a bottom. We'll see what happens. Now here's the deal. Look at the daily chart of NASDAQ. We broke the trend line from the October 2023 low. That's this black trend line right here. And we breached that trend line. I talked about this other trend line from the January 2023 low and the trend line from the October 2022 low way down here. I've talked about it on the weekly chart as well as we've seen. We've now come to this trend line, okay? You're hitting this horizontal support level. Below that, you have the 200 period. You see the black line right here? You have this other gap down here at 16,973. So it's 17,000. I'm sorry, 17,890. So just under 18,000. You have a gap fill right there. So if you lose this trend line, you have this gap fill at 17,890. You have the 200 period moving average, which is right at that level, that same level, just around the 18,000 area. Right now, you're hitting the support level. So again, we could try to find a bottom around this trend line or maybe slightly breaching it. We've already breached this trend line. Bitcoin, big sell-off, 27.5% from the high. Breached the trend line, but then it got back above it. The stock market is likely, as I keep saying, going to form some type of bottom and follow Bitcoin back up. It rose back up and it got a what? A lower high. What's NASDAQ probably going to do? Go up and get a lower high. Bitcoin, I called the bottom there early July, at bottom July 5th. A bottom is forming on Bitcoin. A bottom is forming on Bitcoin. That July low. And eventually it got confirmed on July 13th. And what did NASDAQ do after the July 5th bottom on Bitcoin? NASDAQ peaked on July 10th. NASDAQ was going to sell off. Bitcoin was going to bottom. They currently have an inverse relationship. Bitcoin is in a topping process. We'll always see a bottoming process on the NASDAQ and S&P, and eventually they'll follow Bitcoin back up, in my opinion. We could go, if this level breaks, down to this level. Again, there's no guarantee we fill the gaps, but the Russell is topping. S&P could bottom soon. Bitcoin, again, is in a topping process at resistance, and the stock market could be in a bottoming process. It could be at this trend line with NASDAQ or just below it at the 200 period moving average. We keep going. Again, I told you up here, there's risk that we just keep going all the way down here. Again, do not know the future, okay? Looking at support and resistance. You break this support level, you start coming down beyond the 200, then again, maybe we go back down here beyond the 200 period moving average to 17,000. It's the low is actually 16,673. I try to mark all my charts with the numbers on there for you and for me so we can kind of have a good idea of where support and resistance levels are. If we bounce here, I think we're going back to 20,400 here, rounding up and get a lower high. I think that's a strong possibility. I'm looking for a 5-leg push lower. Looks like that is what is taking place. I think we'll get an ABC move back up and go back above this broken trend line. And maybe we bounce around this one, but we broke this one like Bitcoin did. Bitcoin broke the trend line from the October 2023 low. I think it bottomed in November, actually, right after NASDAQ did. And it broke it and it got back above it. So I think that I wouldn't be surprised if we got back above that trend line and did what Bitcoin did. If the market gets rattled early on next week with tensions in the Middle East over the weekend, then maybe we go lower, closer towards the 200, but still get a bottoming tail and get a recovery. We'll see what happens. About the divergences on the NASDAQ, I told you about the rising wedge, and I told you again right here when we saw the big sell-off, we dropped 500 points. And I told you I believe that the NASDAQ peaked, closing below that upper Bollinger Band, getting the 9 count and all the rest of it that I talked about, hitting the trend lines. We get the lower high, we did, and right at the 78.6 Fibonacci, and then we broke the trend line. Exactly what I said was going to happen happened. We dropped below the 10 period. Here we recovered off our 100 period moving average. We halted at the 50 period here. S&P, I believe, halted at the 20 period, 50 periods kind of curling over here, and then we turned back down, had a big rally. It's over, it's over. And then we resumed the advance. The signals were still bearish. The trend signals and momentum signals were still bearish. Predicted that we would halt at that gap resistance. We did, and we turned down. You get a candle of indecision, so we'll be watching again. Do we have to go lower, a little bit lower? You got a gap fill down here, 17,000, mid 17,000 range. The 200 here, again, near that same area. So again, we'll be watching. Do we try to bottom here? Or if we continue down, you're going down to 17,000. If we just continue lower, we're watching to see how it unfolds. We're becoming very, very oversold here. You're now starting to form a divergence here. So we'll see what happens here with momentum. It remain at extremes for an extended period of time like it did here before you got a pullback. Told you we would likely turn off of the gap resistance and resume the decline for the NASDAQ. Had a bullish divergence here, and I told you at an alternative count where that was 5, but I told you I still thought go down to those other levels I've been talking about on the NASDAQ, and that seems to be the case here. Again, maybe we're done here at the trend line. Maybe we go a little bit lower and form divergences like here on the 15-minute chart of the MACD, closer to that 200 period. They're on the daily chart, but again, you're forming these divergences, so I think you've got a shot at a bottom that could form around these levels. Again, do I think that's going to likely be the case? Probably. No guarantee. But you've got a boatload of gaps. Now, we have another gap today that we gapped lower here from this 18,900 area. So you've got the gap here that needs to be filled. Here we only went to gap resistance, so you have the gap here that needs to be filled, and then you got the gap way up here. Do I think these gaps are going to get filled? Yes, I do. The likelihood, I think these gaps are going to be filled, but I think we're in a topping process. I think the gaps are suggesting we're in a topping process. I think NASDAQ has already peaked. The bear market has already started. I think you've got a 5-leg push lower here in all likelihood. And my Elliott wave speculation, by the way, my wave 3, rather than being here, it could be over here where B is, and this could be the full wave 3, and then this could be the 4, and then this could be the 5. Discount's also possible, but again, it's all speculation. Never trade Elliott wave. It's just for validation or invalidation. I told you I still think that this is where we're going. I think we're going to complete a divergence. Here on NASDAQ, going to be triple bullish diversions here. So I think you've got, which again, it's already underway because we moved to new lows. So I think that, again, you'll likely see some kind of bottom try to carve out. Somebody that told us this was never going to happen, they're going to say the dip, here we go. Now the bull market's a Fed's going to cut. Here we go. I'm telling you, my signals will turn back to bullish. I'll tell you, hey, my signals remain bullish. We're going back to fill the gaps, just like I told you before.